I'd like to say that some men are just creeps, but honestly some people in general are just creeps as well. When my husband was out of town for his job, I decided to have a garage sale with my mom and 2 sisters. We all lived relatively close, so we just had the yard sale at my house since I had a really big front yard. None of us were selling anything that was really that exciting, just a bunch of extra stuff that we had all collected over the years. About an hour into the sale, a normal-looking guy approached me and didn't have anything in his hands to buy. I asked if I could help him, to which he replied in this sort of calm voice saying, "No." The interaction was weird but seemed harmless. I dismissed it somehow. I can't remember exactly what I said and walked away. Not 2 minutes later, the man approached me again. I had my back turned to him, but I could feel him walking up behind me. Instead of turning and saying anything, the man said, "Hello, dear. You have the most amazing eyes." I turned and gave the guy this half smile as I thanked him, and I continued to walk around just trying to distance myself from this creep. I sort of felt bad for a minute because what if this guy was just genuinely trying to be nice and I was being as cold as can be? When he approached me the 3rd time, he had some shirts or something in his hands, and he says, "I'm sorry I was so blunt earlier. I hope I didn't offend you." I smiled and apologized for my cold demeanor, and I told him that it was all right and that I didn't mind the compliment. That was my mistake. I gave the guy an inch and he took a mile, and he immediately said, "Oh, okay, good. Well, we should go out sometime." I was pretty floored by the statement, and I told him that I was married and I wasn't interested. He then started to beg me, saying things like, "Forget about your husband. I'm a real man." And my personal favorite, "What even is marriage? It's just a fancy word." Now I was angry and annoyed, and I told the man that he needed to leave right now. He got angry and upset and tried to play this victim card, but he left after a minute or 2. About an hour later, a pretty woman came up to me with a huge smile on her face saying, "Hello, dear. You have the most amazing eyes." I looked at her with a little disgust because she said exactly what the other guy said no more than an hour earlier. I thanked her, and after an awkward pause, I asked if she needed any help, and she just continued to look at me and said, "You really are beautiful. I think you should forget about your husband and let me and Zachary come over." Well, this told me 2 things right away. 1, this woman was with the creep from earlier, and 2, that creep's name is Zach. I won't write exactly what I said, but let's just say that I said some not so nice words to the woman. She left, and the rest of the afternoon went by with no issues. I felt like I was looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds, though. Every time someone cleared their throat or something like that, I thought Zachary or his female companion were behind me. My sisters and I cleaned everything up, and I ended up going to one of my sister's houses for dinner. I had a bad feeling, and I just felt more comfortable with being with them since my husband wasn't home. We ended up having a classic night together, a night we sisters hadn't shared in a long time. We drank a bottle of wine, or maybe 2, I can't remember, and just laughed all night long. At around midnight, my sister asked her husband to drive me home since he hadn't drank anything, and I wasn't in the right mind to drive my own car. The drive was only about 3 minutes from driveway to driveway, and if we had left 30 seconds later, my night may have ended much differently. As we were driving down the road, my brother-in-law said, "What? Is someone home at your house?" I sat up in my seat and noticed that the garage door was open. Not the overhead door, but the normal one. The garage had a normal door that I kept locked 99% of the time. He pulled to the bottom of the driveway but told me not to get out yet. We couldn't have been sitting for more than 10 seconds when all of a sudden a light on the inside of the house turned on. The bright light in the living room was illuminating the front of the house. I didn't take any chances. I immediately called the police, and my brother-in-law stayed right with me until they showed up. It took about 5 minutes for them to show up, and during that time, we watched these intruders turn on every single light in the house. When the cops finally did come, they must have seen the flashing lights because they ran out of the garage door as fast as they could. 2 officers chased them, and another officer came over to talk to me. A few minutes passed, and the cops came back, and they were unsuccessful in their foot chase. When they ran out of the house, it was easy to see that the 2 intruders were the woman from earlier, and that creep as well. I told the cops everything I could think of with their descriptions. I went inside with my brother-in-law, and they didn't take anything. All they did was smash our wedding picture, and that was it. Everything else seemed untouched, which made this all the more confusing. I had no idea who these people were or what they wanted from me. I slept at my sister's house until my husband came home from his trip, and the next day I installed several cameras around the house. Thankfully, those 2 never came back, and I truly hope that whatever they wanted that evening remains a mystery for the foreseeable future.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Accused. It had been about 6 months or so since I moved to this new neighborhood, but it wasn't until recently that people experienced a series of burglaries. I could feel the tension in the air whenever I walked past others, as I could tell people were on edge and suspicious of their neighbors. I had no idea I was being suspected until one morning when I was getting ready for my part-time job, the doorbell rang. I was shocked to see 2 officers at my doorstep as I opened the door. They started asking me questions without trying to hide that I was getting suspected. Unfortunately, I had caught the attention of the police due to my criminal record from my younger years. Despite my best efforts to become a better person, people were quick to judge me based on my past. I wouldn't have revealed the bitter part of my life if it hadn't been for my job. I tried to explain to the officers that I had nothing to do with the burglaries, but they didn't believe me. After telling me that some neighbors strongly thought it was me, I was arrested and sent to prison. They didn't tell me who those neighbors were. I couldn't believe that I was being punished for something I didn't do. A few days later, when officers couldn't find any evidence against me, they had no other choice but to let me go. The worst part was that even after I was released, people still looked at me with suspicion. It was hard to shake off my past, even though I had worked so hard and had done everything in my power to turn my life around. I thought I could finally put this behind me, but I was wrong. A few days went by and another burglary happened. It wasn't until I saw the 2 nosy women, the oldest residents in the neighborhood, who were the true definition of a Karen, shout at me, "Get out of this place, you criminal!" when I was returning from work one day, that I found out who those neighbors were who were convinced that I was the culprit. After that day, they didn't try to hide their malice and hatred for me and would openly accuse me in front of others. They tried everything they could to make my life miserable and prove me guilty. It was to the point that it almost felt as if they were purposefully trying to divert people's attention toward me. They even spread rumors about me and vandalized my property. Slowly, other people started to get influenced by their behaviors and would give me dirty looks when I would pass by. The children and teenagers would openly call me names. I was at my wit's end. I had done nothing wrong, yet I was treated like a criminal. I tried to reason with those women, but they refused to listen. They were convinced I was responsible for the burglaries, and they wouldn't stop until they had proof. By that point, I had started to suspect that there was something fishy about those 2. That day wasn't going well for me because it looked like the owners of the place where I worked were planning to fire me due to the rumors and were trying to hire my replacement before doing that. I spent the work hours worried, and after finishing my work, I headed home half-heartedly. As I approached my house, I noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. My heart began to race as I quickly realized that something was wrong. I rushed inside my home and saw that it had been completely ransacked. My belongings were thrown around, my drawers emptied, and my furniture upturned. I was in shock and confusion, not knowing what to do. I immediately called the police and reported the break-in. The officers arrived quickly and searched the premises, but they didn't find any evidence pointing to the culprits. However, when questioned, those 2 women accused me of staging the burglary to cover up my tracks. Their accusations were unfounded and hurtful, adding insult to injury. I was shocked and hurt. I couldn't believe that they would go so far as to frame me for a crime I didn't even do. But I knew that I had to prove my innocence once and for all and find out the truth as to why they were so set on to blame me for those burglaries. Being fed up with false accusations, I decided to start my own investigation. I began by questioning the neighbors and gathering evidence. To my surprise, I found a pattern that led me to suspect those two women. Whenever there was a burglar in the area, they would either be out of town or sleeping inside their homes. What was even more unusual was that they would always do these things together. This coincidence seemed too strange to ignore, and it raised a lot of suspicion in my mind. I decided to keep a close eye on them and monitor their activities moving forward. After a bit more investigation and looking into the whereabouts of those days, I eventually uncovered the truth. It turned out that the two women had been behind the burglaries all along. They had been stealing from their neighbors to support their lavish lifestyle and had framed me to divert suspicion away from themselves. I presented the evidence to the police and the women were arrested. They were charged with burglary and framing an innocent man. I was finally vindicated and my name was cleared. The incident taught me a valuable lesson about how people can be quick to judge based on one's past and how difficult it can be to gain their trust and acceptance even after being wrongfully accused. Although I worked hard to become a respected member of the community, it still seemed that some of my neighbors continued to hold my past against me, and I never truly felt like I belonged. It's better to remember that everyone deserves a fair chance and that people could change for the better, but it can be hard to overcome people's preconceived notions. Despite this, I remain hopeful that with time and effort, people will eventually see me for who I am now and not who I used to be.
In December of last year, I realized that because of a promotion I'd received during the summer, I was able to afford a new apartment. My old apartment had a bunch of chronic problems with it, and half of them were the kind of thing that I might have picked up on should I have given it a proper inspection beforehand. So when it came to shopping around for a new place, I was beyond thorough when it came to the kind of research I put in. After I admitted to asking an estate agent how thick the apartment door was, a friend of mine would kind of get on my case and say no landlord is ever going to offer you a tenancy. And in a way, he was right. But I found my approach only put off the dodgy landlords, while the decent ones completely understood why I was asking so many questions. Which is why when I actually found somewhere I liked, it made the experience way more stressful than exciting. I was competing with over 100 other applicants for the tenancy. It was these huge western-facing windows on the second floor too, meaning you get some incredible sunsets along with great spots for houseplants. And the shower, oh my god, the shower. Built-in waterproof Bluetooth speakers, stream jets, UV lights to stop bacteria from going anywhere. Okay, I'll quit flexing about my shower. And spoilers, I got the flat. But it's not like it gives me much joy anymore anyway. None of those amenities do anymore. And the only thing I put myself paying any serious attention to is the living room ceiling. Weird picture, isn't it? A guy just sitting there, drinking coffee, eating dinner, eyes glued to the black-white plaster above him. And I catch myself doing it an awful lot. A disturbing amount, actually. And now, I'll tell you why. Like I said, everything about this flat seemed perfect, and for the most part it was. But literally 8 days after I move in, right while I'm sitting quite confidently that everything was in working order, stuff hits the fan. I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, and the rain is just pelting against the windows. This horrible, cold December rain, the kind that makes it a kind of thrill hearing pattering against the glass. So I'm just chilling when I hear this tapping sound coming from down the hallway. I don't really think anything of it at first, like it honestly sounded like someone in the hallway outside the flat. But after a while, I decide to investigate because the sound just isn't ceasing. As I walk into the hall, I can tell almost right away that the tapping sound is coming from my bathroom, And when I open the door, I'm faced with this steady leak coming from the air vent in the ceiling. Just 8 days in. 8 freaking days, and I have a leak. Yes, it's only a minor one, but as anyone who's dealt with leaking pipes or dodgy plumbing might tell you, even the slightest amount of water can be absolutely catastrophic if a leak isn't dealt with right away. The water might pool somewhere out of reach, rotting wood and causing that disgusting stagnant water smell. It can be a massive pain. So I'm kind of panicking, looking up the names of local plumbers, cursing the landlady's name all the while for not telling me if there were leaky pipes. It had been raining all day, so it could have easily been something to do with all the rain, but I had an entire 3rd floor above me. How was the roof drainage merging with the vents? And that's when I had my big brain, or not so big brain moment, and realized that it might well be coming from the flat upstairs. Maybe they left the bath running or something. I remember thinking it was annoying, but accidents happen. I run upstairs, knock on the door of the unit directly above me, but get nowhere. Then, making sure no one's around to watch me, I kneel down and put my ear to the keyhole. Decently enough, but try explaining that to some stranger with no context. I expected to maybe hear some running water, maybe even the sound of someone mopping up the overflowed bath water. But nothing. It's just silence on the other side. Given that I can hardly go kicking the door in, I just go back to my flat, whack a mop bucket under the leak, then get on the phone with the landlady in case she had a plumber on retainer or something. Being the nice lady that she is, my landlady calls me back within minutes to let me know a plumber is on his way. But given that he was already at a job, I'd have to wait about an hour. No big drama. It was a manageable leak, for the time being anyway, but we'd still have to gain entry into the flat upstairs to make sure if it was the source of the whole thing. So I take it upon myself to walk back upstairs every so often to check if someone had returned home. At least, I presume they were out. There was no reason why they wouldn't just answer the door, right? I checked the first time. Then the second was maybe 50 minutes later. Then the third was just shy of 9 at night, like 20:57 on the dot. I remember because it was 15 minutes before the plumber was due to arrive, and I checked the clock just before making one final trip upstairs to check if the neighbors were home. Only when I get to the front door of the flat, which I'm 100% certain had been closed for the previous 2 calls, I can see that it's ever so slightly ajar. I'm certain someone is home by that point, so out of pure politeness, I get to the door a few loud knocks before shouting like, "Hello?" Expecting someone to appear any second, but again, there's no reply. But that time, I can definitely hear the sound of dripping water inside the apartment. So I go ahead and push the door open, seeing that almost the entire carpet is soaking wet. The flat is laid out exactly like mine, so I know the first room I'm going to encounter is the bathroom. The linoleum floor is flooded, the sink is flooded, but the taps are off. There's just a steady drip, drip, drip from one of them, like it hadn't been turned off all the way. When I call out to see if anyone's home, kind of worried I might be seen as rude for just sort of barging in. Yet I'm greeted by complete silence. Just the sound of my own trainer squishing on the sodden carpet as I'm walking through the flat. If you're imagining this as being somewhat of a creepy scene, you'd be dead right. The closer I got to the living room, the more I realized that something might be terribly wrong there. And what do you know? There was. I think I knew she was dead from the moment I laid eyes on her. It was the awkward way she was lying there on the soaking wet floor with her eyelids kind of half closed. It's hard to describe, but I've never seen a person look like that. Like she was frozen in mid-blink or something. I just knew, you know? Like the gut reaction was so intense that I simply didn't need to check the girl's pulse. I didn't need to call out for her to wake up. I mean, I did just in case. Part of that gut reaction to death was wanting her to wake up. Pretty purely selfish reasons too, so I'd stop freaking out. But it was no good. She was gone. So I called 999. I tried some CPR and chest compressions as best as I could manage, but nothing would rouse her. It was the single most traumatic experience of my life. just splashing around in the half-flooded flat, begging the poor girl to wake up. All before the moment I finally just sat on my butt and accepted that she was dead and there was nothing more I could do. I never cried like that before. I'm not ashamed to admit it, and I stayed sat there like that until I saw blue flashing lights in the window. At first, the police were brilliant. They came in my flat with me, made a note of the leak, telling me it was going to be okay and that I did everything right. I just sat there, nursing a cup of tea and telling them everything exactly as it happened. I remember touching on the whole fact that the door seemed to have spontaneously opened, meaning that at some point in the time between 2035 and 2057, either the victim or her killer had opened the flat's door for whatever reason. The two policemen shot each other this look that I misinterpreted as like an oof moment in retrospect. I think that was a sign of things to come. They definitely started by treating me like I was the poor innocent member of the public who happened to have stumbled across the tragic death of a young woman. But it didn't take long before they changed their attitude entirely. I got a call from a policeman calling himself D.I. Walker, who politely invited me to the local police station for further questioning. He assured me I wasn't in any trouble. They just wanted to go over a few details with me in light of new evidence that had emerged. It was an informal chat, no need for a solicitor or anything serious like that. So me being an absolute tool, I volunteered to talk to two murder police in an interview room with no one else present. They kept up the good cop routine for a while, going over my statement with me while buttering me up for trying the CPR. But a distinct change of tone came when one of the CID blokes asked me if I'd ever been up to the girl's apartment before the night in question. I told them now that I'd only been there for just over a week when the leak started, and as much as it makes me sound like a bit of a jerk, I'm just not the kind of guy to greet new neighbors with a freaking muffin basket or whatever. Then bizarrely, their follow-up question was if I knew anything about electricals, like if I've ever worked as an electrician or repaired appliances for a living. Again, I told them now, but it was my turn to ask a question. Mainly, why they asked me such an unexpected question. That's when they hit me with the fact that I was basically their number one suspect, and the way the guy said it was honestly horrific. Look mate, the thing is we've come up against a bit of a brick wall here, and we're hoping you can help us out. We started off all friendly like we were old pals or something. You've given a brilliant statement here, and we're really grateful for you going into such detail and giving up your spare time. There's just one big problem. You said you knocked on the flat about 3 times between 8 and 9 o'clock. I wanted about 20 till and once just before 9. We got the time of death as being 8:45 at the very latest. So you're saying you didn't hear anything when you knocked the second time. Well, something is going on in the flat that causes the girl's death. I find that very confusing, don't you? I remember every word that he said, and I knew it wasn't even meant to be accusatory. I don't think, not overtly anyway, but I knew what they were getting at. They had to eliminate me as a suspect. But unfortunately for me, that was much easier said than done, because my fingerprints were everywhere, my clothes fibers were everywhere, and there wasn't a single witness of anyone else having visited that girl's flat that day. No one but me, by my own admission. It started to become obvious that the police actually had a suspect in mind, and it was me. Although I was never actually arrested in the weeks that followed, I had my flat searched twice, and police were almost constantly hanging around the building both flats were in. I noticed that they seemed to take particular interest in the building's wiring, and once or twice they seemed to be accompanied by some kind of tradesman, I'm guessing an electrician. And that's about the time I pieced together that the police thought the girl had died in some kind of freak electrical accident. Maybe a current had run through the flooding and just zapped it right there. But wouldn't that mean that I'd get electrocuted too? But that's just it. Despite the police refusing to tell me much about the investigation, I'm pretty sure they theorized that I'd somehow killed the girl using a jolt of electricity, which in my book showed how stumped they were for a legit theory. Don't get me wrong, The prospect of being the main suspect in the murder, getting a wrongful conviction or something, that's a terrifying thing for sure. But like I mentioned, I was never arrested, and after a while, the whole thing just went away. Naturally, I wanted to know everything the police knew concerning my neighbor's death. But after basically being accused of murder by one of them at one point, I wasn't all that keen on drawing any more attention to myself. What's clear is that I was just meters away from a murder I had no idea was happening, and that I'd only just missed whoever the killer was when they slipped out of the apartment and left the door open. But why would they leave the door open? I couldn't have known that there was a leak, so why not just close the door and roll out the possibility of someone stumbling across the murder scene? And what was the point of flooding the flat in the first place? It wasn't just the bathroom sink. The kitchen sink was overflowing too, but why? On top of that, I don't get the whole electrocution angle either. It seems like such an elaborate way to kill someone, flooding the apartment and then running a strong enough current through the water. And how would a person go about doing that remotely? Because they'd have to. Otherwise, they'd be killed too. Which leads me back to the question of who opened the door then? Was it some elaborate way of taking her own life and she wanted someone to find her before she went rotten? Too many questions. So are you all starting to understand why I spent an awful lot of time just staring at my ceiling? Now I can't seem to shake all the questions that have arisen since I moved in here. And what's worse, I'm kind of stuck here. Yeah, it's a nice place, but Jesus, it's tainted now. And it's going to take a long time before I'm going to feel normal again here. It's not like I have the money for a new deposit, and finding a place I actually like is tough going. And that's the gist of it, I suppose. I've been living under what feels like a tomb, and the mysteries of my neighbor's death have been keeping me up at night for freaking months now. I'd been very interested to hear other people's theories on this because, much like the police seem to be, I'm completely flummoxed as to what the explanation is. I mean, it's probably something perfectly rational, something tedious but tragic. But then again, sometimes my imagination starts taking over, and I start thinking that something entirely more sinister is to blame.
There's this app called Tinder, and a lot of my friends are trying to get on it and get laid. I was like my friends trying to make it possible for me getting laid with the app. Since I had no idea how the app thing works, I called in my friend for help. They decided to set up my account and took photographs for the profile, and then set me up good. They decided to make it one heck of an adventure for me, and said that they will set me up for a blind date with the girl. And they decided to do so in order for me to have a fun evening for once. My date was set for Monday, and I was to be dressed in red. And so I did. I left for the pizza place nearby. I was dressed sharp, and the anticipation was too much for me. It was too much. As I sat there, I saw no girl in a while coming in, and then a guy approached my table and called my name. As I got up, he shook my head, and as he did, he said his name was Morris, and he told me that I was his date for the night. I told him I was waiting for one Emily, and said that maybe it was a mistake. But then he showed me the profile of mine that was made for me by my friends. And the thing they did was made my profile on Grindr instead of Tinder, and it kinda made me much more furious than I thought. I told the man that it was my friend that set me up for it, and it was nothing but a big prank. And then Morris got really aggressive and told me that he did not come all the way to just go empty-handed. And he came close and whispered in my ear, "Least you can do is give me a hand in the bathroom." I flipped and said, "Look man, I apologize on behalf of my friends, but there's no way I'm doing anything like that." And as I said that, he came in to forcefully kiss me, and it was then that I punched him. And as I walked out, I was not really feeling good about the day and was actually pissed about my friends. An hour in from that incident, the same guy circled me around the block and then just sucker punched me from behind. And as he stood on top of me trying to unzip his pants, I pushed him, and he was accompanied by one other man who was further chasing me into an alley. And as I felt closed in, I gave up and came up with a different plan than what they had in mind. Since I had the key to the flat and knew that my friends would be coming in right at this moment from the bar, probably hammered out of their mind, I decided to plot a revenge against them and included Morrison and his friend in the plan. And that is when I let them into the flat and showed them the way to the room. To save my ass from these two psycho horny men, I gave up the ass of my friend. It was probably morally very sadistic of me to think of, but as it turns out, my friend that I have been living in with months was closeted too, and the thought that maybe he would run out of the apartment with his pants down scared out of his mind was cut short when I heard 3 voices of pleasured moaning coming out of the room. It was the last night that I spent in that apartment, mostly because in the coming days, the complete apartment became a big gay orgy party place, and that was the last thing I wanted to be a part of. Not that I was homophobic, it was just that I couldn't stand my friend being all smug and happy about his many boyfriends. Meanwhile, he almost got me raped for who now was his platonic boyfriend.